You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
So today I'm joined on the Ecosysteming podcast by Krista Covey, president of First Flight Venture Center. And I should also mention, in full disclosure, as they do on NPR, Krista is one of my bosses as she serves on the board of directors for NC Idea. Welcome, Krista. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Tom. I am excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to this.
As have we. And why don't we start, just for consistency's sake? You know, not everybody that tunes in knows, all the guests as well as we know each other. Because we first met, it's already been 4.5 years, I think.
That's right.
10-year.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
No kidding. But for the sake of our listeners, could you just give a little bit of your biographical background, and then we'll jump off where we come together.
Yeah, great. So I was delighted to join First Flight Venture Center in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. So it was interesting times for sure. Prior to joining First Flight Venture Center, I was working in San Antonio, Texas, as a matter of fact. So I was invited there to help be one of the founding team to start an innovation hub that was part of the Texas Research Technology Foundation. So it was a foundation, and they were looking to start an incubator, accelerator, and other programs really to support economic development through the life sciences and through innovation in the life sciences. And so I was there for a little over 3 years and had a great time. And then prior to that, I really got my start in leading innovation hubs and incubators in Florida. So I was working for an economic development organization in Pasco County, Florida. So I covered a county, and I started my first incubator when I didn't even know what incubation was, really. So I got, little side note, I was doing presentations when I first got into it, and I would show a chicken with an X over it.
You did not.
I did. So the thing that I would get asked is, so you have an incubator, right? And I was like, I do. And so they're like, oh, okay. Are you raising chickens? Are you raising?
Yeah. How many heat lamps do you have?
That's right. So lots of fun there, but that's where I got my start. I loved it. And before that, and how I even really got into incubation and innovation was, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. But I wound up meandering my way into banking, commercial and corporate lending. And, I was working in during the 2008-2009 recession. So it was just brutal, right? We were working with companies, and this is in Florida, and I'll give you an example. I was working with one company, they were doing floor covering, right? And so this was the crux of how I ended up where I am today, and I'm so grateful, but that was a really tough time, right? So they're doing floor covering, the spec industry in Florida was just a disaster. And so this was a family-owned company. They had 17 locations across Florida. So I'm trying to keep them out of SAD, which is the special assets, right? And to keep them from, laying off people. And, they had worked so hard. They'd been tireless entrepreneurs. They'd been very successful. And this is their family business, right? And, the founder's really losing sleep over how does he protect his people? How does he, protect his business? And so I really felt like I was a part of his journey. And I worked with the local economic development organization at the time to help, provide him tools for, or I use them as a tool in my tool belt to help this company, right? As one example. And, out of that experience, a couple things to note. One, they're still in business today. So I'm really excited about it. And so they worked really, really hard and made it through. So win. But secondly, it made me realize, gosh, I really love supporting entrepreneurs. I love being on this journey with them and doing whatever I can to enable their success. And so that was that aha moment for me. What do I want to do when I grow up? I want to be in ecosystem building and incubation, economic development, all of it. I love it. And then third was, boy, I do not want to be a banker. This 100-hour work week gig is tough. So that was really the crux of and the catalyzing event that propelled me into what I do today. And I have never looked back. So yeah.
It's interesting. So you were in Florida for the crash, the 08, 09. It's because, Florida was kind of ground zero for the
That's right.
subprime crisis. At least that's how Michael Lewis, portrayed it in The Big Short. And it's also curious that, historically, if you look at data and if you've been in this space and supporting entrepreneurs, and you can look at data over the last 40 years, some of the best companies that we see, the biggest names that we think of, actually start during severe, recessions and downturns, right? And per the flooring company that you help that still, exists, they're so much stronger for it. I think that's part of
Yes.
The thinking there, at least the narrative around it. And I know 08, 09, I was right there in the heart of it as well, at the Kauffman Foundation, and we saw that impact, all these people that we advocated for, and the ecosystems that we started building back then. It's just like it's one of those shock to the systems, right?
Yes, indeed. And you could, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. We could go down a whole rabbit trail on that one, but just the fact that they were birthed or they're renewed, right, out of this really tough time, and they've had to show grit and resilience and innovation and be just, think differently about things and how to run lean and mean. There's so many lessons when you go through hard times like that, right? But I absolutely think those companies that are either birthed out of those situations, right? Even like the Great, Depression and all that. And if you've gone through it, boy, if you make it through, right? It's not going to be easy, but if you make it through, you're so much better on the other end.
You said the key phrase there, you learn lessons, and the lessons learned are, both good and bad. I, for one, remember one on a very personal level. My brother-in-law at the time, one of my brother-in-laws at the time, was a principal, co-founder of a very large, thriving architectural firm in Northeast Ohio. I think they had at their peak about 200 employees. And they would do a lot of also pro bono public works. They truly had this ethos of like, let's give back, when we can. They, at the time of the crash, the company had a $15 million line of credit, right? And they had less than $1 million on it. So they had bandwidth of 14 million. And he tells me the story that preemptively, when they were all looking at what was happening and there's mass layoffs happening everywhere, the partners came together and said, listen, we'll go ahead and use our line to keep everybody employed. We'll use this time to really focus, because they do hardscaping, like large architectural. So like think big shopping centers and public spaces, like the architects that figure all that out. Like where do you put that 30-ton, piece of artwork and things like that. So they were prepared to invest, go into their own pockets to say, we'll produce all this. But before they could exercise on that, their bank preemptively rescinded 95% of their line. They basically cut off the line of credit. They've never missed a payment. They've been a good client for over a decade. It's kind of like an insurance policy that once you've had the catastrophe, they say, oh, yeah, you know what? We had turned off your policy. And I still to this day remember how angry I was. And I wanted just to name and shame the bank and say, like, what have they been paying you fees for all these years and that relationship you tout? But
painful. I can feel that right now. Yeah, it just pains me. Yeah.
So they had to do the tough layoffs, and because they just couldn't, they didn't have the capacity to do it. But they built back as so many others did. I also remember during that time, my own personal analysis was, and it's kind of formed even more over the years, that when we hit these shocks to our system, and I'm going to tie this to the present because of what we saw with Helene affecting the western part of our state, and this is a global trend that I've seen, in big social uprisings or anything. And we could say this, in Gaza right now. we will know when the recovery has started because of the entrepreneurs. They will be the first on the front line showing signs of life. They are the first that venture forth to see what needs in the market can we meet, right? And it went so far as to back in 08, 09, like Coffin funds so many big, or used to, I should say, fund so many big conferences and stuff like that. And we'd come up with a piece of artwork, a decal, kind of conference swag. And it was E equals R. So entrepreneurs will lead the recovery.
I remember that. I do.
Do you?
Yes.
I'm going to, well, you'll see it again in my keynote speech for the summit coming up, because it's just something I can reflect on. And again, now bringing it to the present, because I think the first time we scheduled this call, wasn't it during Helene? And
we lost power. We lost, yes, at first flight. So yes, we were feeling it.
Yeah. As were many, and many of our good friends and partners and companies out West are digging out from that, and will continue. That recovery will take years, as it does. But importantly, they are part of a broader community that's got their back. So sorry to kind of take you down memory lane of that period of time, but I think for our listeners, something they would be interested to get your perspective on is, you've worked in this space in two very large states, Florida and the great country of Texas. So actually, I love San Antonio. I think it's not nearly, it doesn't get nearly the amount of love that it deserves. It's a really good town. But all kidding aside, you've worked in these very big markets. North Carolina is no shabby little market itself, but like, any thoughts, comparisons, similarities, differences?
Well, first I'll mention this. When, as I said, I joined First Flight in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. Everything was shut down. It was just I actually drove from Texas to North Carolina over 2 days. So 18 hours on the road one day and then 10 hours the next. And that was pretty brutal because I had to close on my house and couldn't find a place to stay. Right. So, I mean, it was at the height.
Wow.
So, but when I came here, I'm like, oh my gosh, in this, I'm taking on this new role, and part of my identity, right? Who I am is, I'm all about collaboration, community oriented, meeting people and understanding, those that I'm serving, right? So I got to get out there. How am I going to do this? And Zoom was, just taken off, right? And I can't tell you how much this community meant to me, because everybody stepped up. Everybody was like, Krista, you're new here. I know you can't meet anybody in person, but let me set up a call, on Zoom with you to meet this person, X, Y, and Z, right? And it was unreal. I mean, in the best way possible. I was introduced, I was cared for, I was welcomed, and that is really the crux of, in my opinion, of North Carolina, right? It's very easy to navigate the community, to talk to people, to feel welcome, to feel supported.
More so than like in Florida and Texas?
In many ways, yes. And again, this was a unique experience that we were all going through, right? The world was going through.
Absolutely.
Now, we absolutely had pockets of collaboration and community in Texas and in Florida, but it was different, right? So it's a different type of community. So, which is okay, and not saying anything bad at all. In San Antonio, it's just a large. I mean, the whole, I think it was like 4 million, MS in the larger MSA, and you're just south of Austin, right? So you're kind of in that whole innovation space, and just it's a large area, and you can drive for hours and hours and hours. Now, just through one of the cities, and as an example, I drove for 3 hours in Houston, and after 3 hours I was still in Houston, right? So just for context purposes. So it's just a large, depending on where you are in Texas, it's just so massive, right? And so it's when I was there, we were still meeting in person. we were still having those face-to-face, interactions. So when I say it was different, it was just different because not everything was on Zoom. But you had to figure out how to navigate that ecosystem in a different way, is I guess, my perspective on that. So there was a lot happening in San Antonio. Florida, if you look at it, it's almost like its own little ecosystem within an ecosystem. So Central Florida is its own little ecosystem. It always cracks me up when the news, talks about Miami and being Florida. Miami is Miami. Right? And
Might as well
so
be a different state.
it's like a different state, and that's not a bad thing. It's just Miami, right? So if you're talking with a community and you're interacting in a community in Miami or with folks from that area, you're going to have a very different experience, a very different conversation if you're in Lakeland, for example, right? Which is in Central Florida. Again, not a bad thing, but it's about knowing that your own community, right? So everywhere I have been, it's been a different experience. And so I think for ecosystem builders, for people that are supporting the innovators and entrepreneurs, you can't just, you have to know your own, you have to know your community. And each community is different, right? The assets, the resources, the talent, it's all different and it's unique and special. So I feel called to understand the community, right? And cultivate the assets and the individual skill sets and the resources of the community here in North Carolina, because it's, yes, we've got so much going on here, but it's so unique in so many good ways.
Yeah, I would say I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, I came from the polite Midwest, and I call Northeast Ohio home, and so we, very collaborative spirit. We also had, this might sound counterintuitive, we had the benefit of crisis to help catalyze our efforts, right? So, as I exited my last company and, was hitting 40 and I was looking around going like, what's the next grand adventure? I joined this group of other founders and created this thing called Jumpstart, which is similar to what NC Idea does in Northeast Ohio. Perhaps the biggest difference being that the grants are actually debt, so they're convertible notes, because there was no endowment. Jumpstart's a public charity, so we didn't have two nickels to rub together. As a matter of fact, as the founding CMO, my job was largely walking around with my tin cup begging for money, under the promise that it would someday become an evergreen, entity, so it wouldn't need to continue to depend upon public support. And I'm happy to say, 18, 19 years later, their balance sheet, I'm envious of it because it's about 3x ours. And that's making good on that promise that would become evergreen, right? You invest in enough companies, you focus on high growth, high impact. They had, I believe it's even 2 unicorn exits. I know for a fact one, Cover My Meds, exited and had a very nice payday for Jumpstart. But that's the model, right? Like that's how it's supposed to work.
That's right.
When it works well. And speaking of working well, let's brag a little bit about First Flight. It's not the same it was when I started in North Carolina, 9 years ago. So, what is the big ambition for First Flight now and the priorities as you see them as the leader of the organization?
Yeah, so I am so proud of where we've come, and I have an amazing team at First Flight Venture Center. And so our big ambition, frankly, is to be a global center of excellence. Right? We are proud to be in North Carolina. We are proud to be in RTP, but most importantly, we're serving our community. We're serving, and that is across the state. And so we want to be recognized as being a leader to help early stage innovators and entrepreneurs take their very critical science and technology to market, right? Why? Because they're the ones that are solving big problems that our world is facing, and they're the ones that are making our world better, safer, healthier. And so my job and my team's job is to understand our entrepreneur's journey, right? What that looks like and all the opportunities that they could go after, but also all the barriers. And so how can we be enablers and put more opportunities in front of them, but also what can we do to reduce the barriers to success? So ultimately they can be as successful as possible. And then how can we promote them and promote the work so that we can be that beacon, right? We can be looked at from across the globe and say, what are they doing? How are they enabling their entrepreneurs? Because it seems like the entrepreneurs are doing really, really well, right? And if the entrepreneurs are doing well, then the community is doing well, then the ecosystem is doing well, then the states, right? It's all that. It's economic development, it's economic empowerment, it's economic, success. And so what we've realized, we needed to have programs, right, to meet the entrepreneur at every stage, from ideation all the way through commercialization. So if you've got somebody that's, maybe they're a scientist, maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're a tinkerer, right? That whatever the case may be, they come up with something and say, gosh, what if I could take this and put it in the hands of, give it to the market, right? So that it can solve some problem. But gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what to do. That's where we can be helpful, right? We've got some early stage programs to help them, get some validation. Is your idea something that you can turn into a business, and who might want this idea, and think about sustainability. Who might pay for this idea, right? And so we can help them navigate that scenario. How do you fund this business, right? If you're now pursuing this business, are you going after angel, after you're going venture? Maybe you don't need investment. Maybe there's some other paths to funding, right? Maybe you can go right to customers. So again, our job is to walk with the entrepreneur, to meet them wherever they are on their journey, right? And we work with companies that have gotten significant investments. They're looking for an acquisition, right? So they want to have significant impact. They want to affect millions of people. We want to see that success. So I'd say the biggest change, we've implemented a lot more programs over the past 4.5 years. And one of the other ways that we serve our companies that is so critical is with the physical space, right? So it's the offices, it's the labs, but at a very affordable rate. So, we're working with startups. They're typically cash strapped, right? Or they're going after, I know, shocking, right? So how can we enable them to get that critical, lab and office space, which again, if you're working with science and technology companies, they need, the equipment, they need specialized equipment, they need hood systems and fume hoods and biologic, hood systems and all that, wet lab spaces. So how can we give that to them? And so that's been part of First Light's mission on the incubator side. And we have been doing this work on the incubation side for over 33 years. We've graduated over 400 companies. That's close to 430 right now. And, they are creating significant economic impact. So they have
no doubt
14 billion currently in market capitalization annually. So we know that that's conservative because on top of, we have about 30 to 40 resident companies at any given time, but we're actually serving hundreds of companies across the state and now even internationally every single year. And that does not count, all of those folks. So we've got more work to be done, a lot more work. It'll never end, right? But we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that innovators and entrepreneurs are as successful as possible.
At what point do they graduate? Have you noticed a commonality that's like, oh yeah, when they hit 2 million in ARR, or just their bench needs exceed the capacity we have here? Or have you noticed at what point do they reach escape velocity and have to kind of leave the nest?
Yeah, good question. So typically when they start here, when they're at the incubation stage, right? Maybe we've been working with them for a little while and we've helped them get, an SBIR grant or something so that they can afford, the lab space. So they typically will start with 1 or 2 spaces, 1 office, 1 lab, maybe. Maybe they have 1 person, maybe they have 2 people. So that's great. And after a while, so we see, the average tenure of an incubator program is about 24 months, and sometimes it's shorter for, more of the tech, could be software, hardware, and sometimes longer for biotech, as an example. We do a lot in ag tech. So at some point, and sometimes it may be 3 years, right? They're doing all the right things. They're hiring more people. They're buying more equipment. They're bursting at the seams, right? They've got traction in their business. And then, at that point, we've seen some themes, or I have seen some themes, they're over 10 employees. They've probably got at least 4 labs at that point, right? And so we try to accommodate their growth. But that's the time where mama bird is probably going to talk to the baby bird and say, okay, time to fly the coop, right? And so at that point, and we will help them get to their next phase of growth. But we're also challenged with that, frankly, because even though we're so blessed to be in the Research Triangle Park, and again, we're serving companies, across the state, we don't have that next graduation space that is
I've heard that.
affordable, right?
That's affordable being the key phrase.
Yes. So we are challenged. So when they graduate us, they're looking, on average, our, I think the last 3 graduates have all graduated into 9 to 12,000 square feet of space, right? And so that's a big jump from going from, maybe
Sure.
1,000 square feet to that. So they are they're at this really critical inflection point, but that's a challenge. Yeah.
Those of us with the entrepreneurial gene mutation, we hear challenges, and that we hear somebody says challenges, we hear opportunities.
That's
so
right. That's exactly
maybe there's
right.
going to be one that comes out of that. I remember how it might have been your predecessor, but I remember a woman, tenured faculty at one of the big 3, doing startups, and she had come to that conclusion that there was a challenge. She needed like 10,000 square feet of space, and she was looking at a facility that might suit her needs that had 40,000 square feet. And her assumption was that, and then I've got room for us to grow a little bit more, but also other companies that are in the same, boat as we are to expand. So who knows, there might be more inventory coming on at some point in the future, or maybe some market forces will help with pricing pressures, at the risk of being delicate way to say that.
Well, if I had more space, I could serve more innovators and entrepreneurs.
What?
So
I think I may have heard that once or twice. And for the people listening, I should mention, we can see each other while we record these, and we're kind of grins from ear to ear, only because we have talked about this.
yes.
And First Flight's in a very similar capacity to NC Idea. As a board member, we could 3x our output if we had the capital to do that. So that's going to be a whole nother podcast for another day. We'll save that. But I want to, one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you, one of the many reasons, was also that you're kind of you're just a good steward, good citizen in this thing of ours that we refer to as our ecosystem. And so it's not just worrying about First Flight, right? It's also helping others, and
That's right.
and being part of something better. So you recently joined as a founding board of advisor to the Cary Venture Capital Fund.
That's right.
I am likewise committed. I'm just curious. I don't think I got a chance to ask you, why did you do it? Why did you agree to jump in and serve in that capacity?
Probably for a similar reason that you did, right? It's a critical need. We need more capital in North Carolina. We've got innovators that are doing important critical work, and they need funding. So it was really interesting. Yesterday I was at the Big Launch Challenge, and by the Launch Place, and ACA is partnered with them. So the Angel Capital Association, and Pat Gouen, who's a good friend and the CEO of ACA, was just talking about, the lack of investment, also on an angel side, but on the venture, the later stage side, we're not there yet, right? We've got innovators, we've got great companies, but they're still going out of the state to get investment. And that is a shame. That is not okay.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And so that is really my heart on that. I don't want them to have to go out of state. They should get every opportunity to be as successful as possible in North Carolina.
Yeah. You were right when you started with, probably for similar reasons as to why I joined. And I would just echo what you said, backed up by our own data. We survey all of our funded companies on an annual basis. We track through PitchBook and other sources, SEC filings and fundings. And, it was kind of a good news, bad news situation over the last couple of years, because especially in 2023, it was like, oh, winter is coming, stretch out every penny you can, the easy sloppy days are over, all this weird stuff. There was one of the funds here hosts an annual conference and brought in these New York and West Coast funds that were from what was told to me by several that were in attendance, they were almost chastising the entrepreneurs for all the easy money that the funds were pouring out during
goodness.
that time. I mean, talk about blind spot, arrogance,
yes.
like more than mildly oblivious. That was like overtly oblivious and like, okay, mansplain it to me a little bit more. Although from what I understand, one of the most offensive comments came from a woman who had used a term, I think it was cockroach startups, something to that effect. And, whatevs, right? The good news for us was that it was some near record fundraising through our companies, and they had raised over 100 million in the span of about 20 months. And there was not like one that did 60 mil, right? The average funding size was, I think, under 2 million, just under 2 million. So it was 51. There were 51 fundings during that time period. And so like, that's the great news. To what you just said, though, the thing that pissed me off was over 70% came from out of state, which always begs the question, what are these out of state funds seeing in our portfolio that the the state capital stack doesn't find worthy of investing in? The second piece of that, and I've heard this directly from all of our sophisticated founders, is it's not even maybe so much the funding, like the availability, getting a willingness, but it's valuations. There's just this, and now I'm just going to channel things that I've said. I think it's very nuanced and it's probably more complicated than the oversimplification, but the way I'm hearing it from the founders is just this, we have this inferiority complex as a state, as a region, that like I don't care how big the potential, how much traction you have, you can't ask for a pre-money valuation above 5 million. Right. And in the coast or New York, like they won't even talk to you unless you're starting at 10. Right. And it's just like this big disconnect. And I've even pissed off a fair number, of the funders, even though we're one of the largest LPs and one of the most active funds in the state, because that's mission related investing on our part. But, my standard snarky response is, show me the data that proves I'm wrong, because I'll share my data. Right. And when you can prove to me through data that I'm full of horse hockey, then fine. Maybe, I'll lower my rhetoric a little bit, but I find that I'll have to see it to believe it. Let's put it that way. And that's a long way to explain why I too joined the advisory board at Carey, because the model, at least as it's been pitched to us, is that it is focused here. The data, the research, Raminder Dillon, I should mention, is the managing partner. He's done this in other states, notably Arizona and Utah, with grand success. And, his analytics, his algorithm, so to speak. And he's not alone in this. I've talked to no less than a half dozen people that are slowly and discreetly thinking about, setting up shop here. And they're all seeing the same thing, this tremendous potential. Like this is going to be the next Silicon Valley. The funny thing is, to transplants like you and me, we don't have to be told that. We're not here by accident, right?
That's right.
We're here intentionally. So,
And Silicon Valley, just as a reminder for our audience, was not built in a day, right?
no.
That was a 60-year plan. And so, but we have to work now to make that happen, right? So, and not that we don't want to be Silicon Valley, but we want to be North Carolina. But yeah, the work that we're doing now is hopefully the impact in many decades from now, right? And future generations. So
absolutely. Yeah. People that don't understand history or care to research it, like Silicon Valley, I always thought this when I would hear Chambers like doing these junkets to Silicon Valley, because like we want to try to, and I'm just like, you can't replicate it. There were the Fairchild 8, right? Like that was a time in society. It was a time in innovation and technology. Like there are so many, it's like controlling the wind, right? Like it just came together then. Like be your own version of it.
That's right. Well, I mean, even look at RTP, right? So these were thought leaders. This was, government, private companies, individuals that cared about taking this, Pine Barren, right? We were, one of the poorest, this was the poorest area and one of the poorest states at the time. And now look at it. It's RTP. It's one of the world's, best, research parks. I mean, but that took collaboration, thought leadership, care, money, all of the things, and time. Right?
I would also say political courage.
That's right. Absolutely.
Which seems to be in short supply at the moment.
Yeah.
But that too is a talk for a different time, and that would require some adult beverages. So, I'm getting the hook from Christian, which is my reminder then to kind of land this plane. And we've tried this. You got to be clever. You have to come up with something different, right? Like what's the hook? So, since this is all about building ecosystems, and ecosystems are many things, not the least of which a foundation of networks and people being connected and organizations being connected. So with that being said, what would you hazard to guess on LinkedIn how many mutual connections you and I have?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
Would you be surprised if it was over 100?
No.
200?
No.
300?
No.
How about 526?
Oh my goodness. That's awesome.
It is. And one of the things I enjoy most in preparing for these interviews is, looking at that and like, okay, what can we pull out? So like what jumps out for you and I is shared. I didn't even have to go past one screen, would be Rob Creighton at Windlift and Huadatan of Planted, right? Two very technical founded companies. And so when I see both of them and they came right after each other, and I was like, I've been meaning to ask you this, and this is my way to do that. What is the difference between high science and deep tech?
So, little secret, it might be the same thing.
What? Say it ain't so.
I know. Can you believe it? But you have to meet people where they are, right? And so some folks are very scientific minded, scientific methodology, or they work in a lab, and then some are tech founders, right? That maybe they're and a lot of times that's like IT or software or something like that. But really, it's that new novel. We're really talking about innovation and some type of solution that is hard to do, that takes a long time. Usually, you have a lot of capital, right, to get to fruition, to get to success, and so. Science, yes, there's definitely an underpinning, but you could say, there's a scientific underpinning to deep technology because there's algorithms, there's physics, there's all the things. So, yes, we say that we serve high science, deep tech, but ultimately it's high impact.
There you go. Well, I'll say this because I'm not nearly as smart as you. I just consider it in the context of the company. So when I think Windlift, I think high science, because they're flying drones. And I recently got a chance to see a demo of that. It's fantastic. In Planted, I'm going to go with deep tech because they're extracting from the ground. They're using this, proprietary switchgrass. So that's my very unsophisticated way of attributing either term to either, but in aggregate, both are great companies.
And they're both up for the High Flyer Award along with DMC Bio.
So I've been there for several years, but it's always the last several years, it's been after our summit. So I've been like a bit of a zombie at that function because it takes me a couple days to recover. So this year it's before. So I should hopefully get the best and brightest out of me on that one. But yeah, it's a great event.
We always had it, as a part of the Global Entrepreneurship Week, and there's just so much happening. And it's always been the Friday before Thanksgiving, which it probably will be next year again. But it's just like, it's kind of like a whirlwind. And so this year we're excited to have it earlier.
Yeah.
So,
well, I look forward to it. Krista, thank you so much. Thank you for your service on our board. Thank you for what you do in the ecosystem more broadly. And if I can ever be of any service to you or First Flight, hopefully you need only ask.
Thank you, my friend. It's truly an honor and a pleasure, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.